Hal Sasko was a respectful man in his local community, or so everyone thought. But when word broke out about his terrible behavior towards 18-year-old Sarah McLynn, the news was sure to turn heads. Unfortunately for Hal Sasko, it was already too late. He had manipulated a vulnerable woman who, unbeknownst to him at the time, would eventually snap back in the most violent of ways. All of a sudden, our predator had become the prey. So, who precisely is Hal Sasko? What did he do to Sarah Gonzalez McLynn? How would she react to his unbearable pressure? And what would her ultimate punishment be? Sarah Gonzalez McLynn was born on July 9, 1994. She grew up in Topeka, the capital city of the state of Kansas in the United States. During her early years, she was homeschooled and did not attend traditional school. Sarah grew up as a naive and shy child, but she was also very kind and considerate. She had a younger brother with a disability, whom she always looked after, and an older sister with whom she was very close. When Sarah was still a child, a neighbor abused her, causing her severe trauma. This trauma had a profound effect on her life. She began experiencing nightmares in which she relived the abuse, waking up in the middle of the night in a panic. The stress and anxiety kept her from living peacefully. It was during this time that Sarah began running away from home and drinking alcohol. Her parents, concerned about her well-being, decided to take her to a psychologist to help her cope with the trauma. However, the situation did not improve, and things only got worse at home. Around the same time, her parents divorced, which deeply affected her. According to Sarah, her parents' divorce made her feel unloved at home. Over time, she completely lost contact with her father, and her relationship with her mother became increasingly strained. Sarah felt out of place at home and sought to leave as soon as possible. At the age of 14, Sarah went to work in a pizza parlor. The owner of the place was a middle-aged man named Hal Sasko. At first glance, Hal Sasko appeared to be a successful and upright man. At that time, he owned 3 pizzerias and was a devout Christian. However, his employees had a different perspective. They said that Hal Sasko's behavior was inappropriate. One of the employees, Terry David, the manager of one of the locations, mentioned that Hal Sasko had instructed him to hire only young, attractive girls. Apparently, Terry didn't like this, and whenever he hired a girl, he warned her to be cautious around her boss. When Sarah was hired and received this warning from Terry, she was still very naive and thought that he was exaggerating. When she started working at the pizzeria, Hal Sasko began to socialize with her and over time gained her trust. He even picked her up from school, drove her to work, bought her things, and asked her to confide in him, telling her to think of him as a father. However, he also instructed her not to tell her mother about what was going on. Sarah obeyed him, and her family never knew about their relationship. Parallel to her relationship with Hal Sasko, whom she began to see as a father, Sarah, at the age of 16, survived another assault, this time by a close friend. According to her, she and her friend were on vacation together when he pushed her onto the table, causing it to break. He then piled on top of her, assaulted her, and even burned her back with a cigarette. This incident deeply affected Sarah, who had already been working through the trauma of her childhood abuse in psychotherapy. In this new episode, the ghosts of the past returned to haunt her. Sarah returned to psychotherapy, and this time, she was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. The situation quickly spiraled out of control. The stress and depression intensified to the point where the teenager attempted to end her life. As a result, Sarah was placed in a psychiatric hospital for a period of time. There, she received therapy as well as medication for rehabilitation. When Sarah was released from the hospital, she continued to take her medication and see a psychologist. This again started to help her overcome everything she had been through. However, the situation at home remained very stressful, and Sarah could not bear the atmosphere there. By the time she was hospitalized, she was no longer working at Hal Sasko's pizza place, but they kept in touch. Hal Sasko would pick her up from school, take her to lunch, and ask her about her life. The 50-year-old man saw an opportunity when Sarah was very vulnerable and decided to take advantage of it. During that period of Sarah's life, Hal Sasko suggested several times that she move in with him. He was single, had no children, no commitments, and lived alone. Besides, His business was doing very well, and he told Sarah that he could help her financially. Hal Sasko even offered to pay for her college tuition. Sarah repeatedly refused. She did not want to move in with Hal Sasko, although she really wanted to leave home because the conflicts with her mother were daily and often very violent. Finally, in 2012, when she graduated from high school and turned 17, Sarah accepted Hal Sasko's offer and moved in with him. At the time, it seemed to her that this was the beginning of a new life, and that with this man, she would have everything she needed. Indeed, at first, Hal Sasko was just like that. He bought Sarah everything she needed, enrolled her in college, provided her with food, a roof over her head, and demanded nothing in return. He bought her gifts, was very attentive to what she needed, as well as what she wanted. But everything changed when Sarah turned 18 years old. At that time, Hal Sasko began to make inappropriate proposals to her. He suggested that Sarah engage in a relationship with him in exchange for everything he had done for her. Obviously, she refused. All the previous months, while she had been living with Hal Sasko, they had pretended to be stepfather and stepdaughter to avoid misunderstandings and misinterpretations of their relationship. Sarah never thought that the man would ask her to engage in such a relationship with him. According to the girl's mother, she never agreed to let her daughter move in with Hal Sasko, but Sarah never listened to her. Several people close to Hal Sasko and Sarah said that she even called him daddy. So the fact that he asked her for this kind of intimacy really surprised her. When Sarah refused, Hal Sasko became very angry. He implied that if she did not agree to his demands, there would be no home or anything else for her. Hal Sasko also knew that Sarah had a history of substance abuse problems and that she had started using alcohol and illegal substances at a very young age. The man took advantage of this and offered her various illegal substances. When Sarah was under the influence of these substances, Hal Sasko tried to take advantage of her and even forced himself on her several times. Each time the girl refused, the man became angrier, more aggressive, and violent towards her. Hal Sasko then wrote Sarah a list of all the things he had bought her and stated that until she returned all the money to him, she could not leave the house. He manipulated her by threatening to sue her for non-payment if she tried to run away. By then, Sarah had a steady job, but she was earning minimum wage, and her income was not enough to cover everything Hal Sasko demanded of her. Among the expenses were 2 expensive cosmetic surgeries that Sarah had undergone under pressure from Hal Sasko. One was a nose job, and the other was a buttock implant. The second surgery caused her so much pain that she was on medication for months. Hal Sasko demanded $16,000 from Sarah. In addition to all these payments for gifts, the man also demanded that the girl pay him for the months she lived in his home. Sarah could not return home to her mother because Hal Sasko had psychologically abused and manipulated her, telling her that no one wanted her at home and that she would definitely not be accepted there. Her behavior changed completely, and she was no longer a quiet, naive girl with a very kind heart. She became an aggressive girl who did not want to talk to anyone and defended herself at the slightest remark. According to Sarah, gradually, the ideas in her head changed, and she began to feel the urge to harm. First, she went to a pet store and bought rabbits. When she got home, she killed them with a knife, skinned them, and then ate them. Hal Sasko witnessed all of this, but he never said anything to her. Moreover, he laughed at her. If Sarah wasn't at work, she was at Hal Sasko's house, always under the influence of illegal substances or alcohol, and in a very bad mood because of everything she had been through. At one point, Sarah started taking antidepressants, thinking they might help her. A few weeks went by, and they had no effect. Then she switched to stronger ones, but they didn't help either. Eventually, the girl entered a spiral of self-destruction, and it was only a matter of time before something terrible happened in that house. On January 17, 2014, police officers came to Hal Sasko's house. His co-workers had reported him missing after he had not shown up at the pizzeria for several days, and they had been unable to contact him. The officers rang the doorbell several times, but no one answered. That's when they decided to look in the windows to see if they could see anything. One of them managed to see a man's body in a pool of blood, and the officers broke down the door of the house to get inside. Once inside the house, they found several empty beer cans next to the body. Hal Sasko's body was taken to the medical examiner's office for examination, and it was determined that he had died from several stab wounds to the neck. In addition, a report was made regarding the contents of the beer cans. According to the forensic report, they contained traces of sedative pills. The police knew that Sarah lived in the house with Hal Sasko, and when they got there, they found her cell phone. Knowing her age, they thought she was missing. Perhaps someone had taken the girl against her will. The officers later learned that Sarah had called work and said she would be away for a few days due to the death of a relative. They spoke to the girl's family, and her mother said her daughter had been trying to contact her grandmother. The police traced the calls and found that they were made from payphones at various convenience stores. By identifying the locations of these stores, they determined that Sarah was traveling from Kansas to Texas. They also reviewed the surveillance footage at these stores and confirmed that the caller was indeed Sarah and that she was alone at the time. Realizing that Sarah had not been kidnapped, she became the prime suspect in Hal Sasko's murder. On January 25, 2014, 11 days after the murder, 19-year-old Sarah was found by park rangers sleeping in Hal Sasko's car in Everglades National Park. At around 10:30 p.m., when they woke her up to arrest her, they discovered she had a loaded gun. A search of the car turned up another gun, illegal substances, an axe, and 2 knives. At the time of her arrest, Sarah was not taken to Kansas, but was left in Florida, where she was questioned by several investigators. The girl offered no resistance and did not try to make up any story. She quickly admitted that she had indeed killed Hal Sasko and fled the scene. Sarah explained that the man had been bullying her and that she saw this as the only way to get rid of him. The girl detailed everything. According to her, a few days before the crime, she went to the pharmacy when Hal Sasko was not at home and bought a pack of pills for insomnia. On January 14th, 3 days before the discovery of the man's body, he had a day off and began making repairs in the house, asking Sarah to bring him a beer. The girl said she realized at that moment that this was her chance. She knew that Hal Sasko would not only drink the beer but would ask for more and more. After the 3rd can of beer, Sarah began putting sleeping pills into Hal Sasko's drink. She said she waited until the 3rd can so he wouldn't notice the strange taste. While Hal Sasko was asking for more beer, she continued to add pills to his drink and, according to the police, gave him a total of 5. This combination of medication and alcohol caused Hal Sasko to lose consciousness. Sarah then quickly tied his hands and feet together. At some point, she said Hal Sasko woke up for about a minute and mumbled something. Sarah didn't understand him very well but said she felt very sorry for the man. However, at that time she was determined to carry out her plan. She pulled out a knife and stabbed him several times in the neck, nearly decapitating him. When the girl realized that Hal Sasko was dead, she took his blood and wrote the word "freedom" on the bathroom wall. Sarah then washed her hands, showered, and changed her clothes. She took money, a tablet, and Hal Sasko's car from the house and left. She says she left her cell phone behind so the police wouldn't track it and thought something had happened to her, too. The girl drove toward Texas, but when she arrived, she didn't like it there because it was too cold at night, so she continued driving to Florida. Sarah slept in the car most of the time and stopped to rest on the highway. Once she arrived in Florida, she went to James Baker, a local tattoo artist, to get a tattoo. This was not Sarah's first tattoo. She already had the phrase "Only God can judge me" on her shoulder. For her second tattoo, Sarah chose a quote from a book, "The Ware of the Dark Pit at the Bottom of Our Heart. In its icy black depths dwell strange, twisted creatures that are best not disturbed." Sarah had hoped that by cooperating with the police and telling the whole story of Hal Sasko's abuse, they would be lenient with her and commute her sentence. However, the police decided not to do so. They portrayed Sarah as a true psychopath and Hal Sasko as a calm Catholic who only wanted to help the girl. At one point during the interrogation, Sarah told one of the officers that during the fits of rage she experienced at Hal Sasko's house, she had the urge to kill. The prosecutor argued that Sarah killed Hal Sasko because she wanted to experience what it was like to kill a man, not because he was violent toward her. The police also found a message on Sarah's phone in which Hal Sasko apologized to her for forcing her to have sexual relations with him. However, none of this was presented to the jury in the first trial and all evidence of Hal Sasko's abuse of Sarah was ignored in the pursuit of justice. In February 2014, Sarah's trial began. Her lawyer decided not to use all of Hal Sasko's abuses in her defense, as the prosecution did not consider them either. Instead, he opted for a different and risky strategy, suggesting that Sarah try to prove her innocence on the grounds of mental disorder, specifically dissociative identity disorder. According to the defense, Sarah had developed multiple alter egos to cope with the abuse she endured. However, this defense strategy was unsuccessful. Neither the judge nor the jury believed the defense's claims. The prosecution presented a different narrative, focusing on the idea that Sarah killed Hal Sasko solely to experience what it was like to kill a man. They argued that the sexual relationship, although it occurred under Hal Sasko's pressure, was consensual and not part of the violence. Additionally, the prosecution claimed that the substances found were bought by Sarah herself and not brought home by Hal Sasko, despite the lack of concrete evidence. The prosecution was able to prove that Sarah had planned to kill Hal Sasko. Her phone contained several messages to her sister, indicating she had already found a way to permanently get rid of Hal Sasko. Thus, the prosecution argued that the crime was premeditated and planned, and they requested a conviction for first-degree murder. To support this claim further, Sarah's browser history was examined, revealing that she had spent a month researching the vulnerabilities of the neck and methods of attacking a person. On September 4, 2015, Sarah, who was 21 years old at the time, was found guilty of first-degree premeditated murder and sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 50 years. All of the information about Hal Sasko's abuse and witnesses that the prosecution did not admit became known to the media, and the case was widely publicized. It was revealed that much of the information about the conditions of Sarah and Hal Sasko's relationship was withheld from the jury. The reasons behind this decision remain unclear, whether it was to preserve Hal Sasko's image as a quiet, religious man in the eyes of the public, or if the prosecution simply aimed to secure the harshest possible sentence for Sarah. This revelation attracted increasing public attention. In 2021, Sarah struck a deal with the prosecutor, resulting in her sentence being reduced from 50 years to 25 years. Although she is still serving a life sentence, she will be eligible to apply for release after 25 years. The story may have ended, but questions continue to echo in our minds. Did the verdict really bring the fairness and justice we hoped for? Sometimes a perfect ending is not possible in every situation. We should not forget that each case reflects many different perspectives and emotions. It is important that we face them with humanity and fairness. The truth may be hidden or distorted in many situations, but the search for justice must always be done with impartiality, respect for all parties involved, and the desire to bring the truth. What do you think of this complex case? Do you believe Sarah is responsible for what happened? Share your thoughts in the comments.